I need help. And Shamika, Delano, TJ, somebody jump in here. There seems to be a group of people that they're calling Black Hebrew Israelites. Yeah. I don't, and this seems to be very offensive. These people, what they believe is very offensive, that they're arguing that black people are the original Jews or are the Jews. What is y'all, I don't, and again, I'm not playing dumb, I really don't understand why it's offensive, or I'm not even sure what's the logic behind the argument. Does anybody know? Can someone help me understand this issue?
In terms of what Kanye said, or in terms of Black Hebrew Israelite teaching?
Black Hebrew Israelite teaching. Is that X-Clan? Is that what, you remember the rap group X-Clan? You too young to remember X-Clan?
I don't remember X-Clan.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember the name, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my sort of rudimentary understanding, because I know some guys who are Black Hebrew Israelites. I think the two main things are that black people in America are part of the 12 tribes of Israel. So that black folk are Jews to what Kanye is saying. Now, I don't know if he believes in Black Hebrew Israelite teaching or if he's pulling on a different thread. So it's that black people are Jews, and that when you read about Jewish customs and so on in the Old Testament, that is speaking to black people today. So there's a lot of emphasis on keeping the commandments and keeping customs and following, all of the laws down to a T. There's also the notion within Black Hebrew Israelite teaching that white people cannot be saved. So I believe they tend to refer to them as Edomites. So sometimes if you see Black Hebrew Israelites out on the street, they do a fair amount of street preaching, quote unquote, heavy air quotes. And sometimes what they'll do if a white person is passing by, they'll have them read certain scriptures. They'll berate them publicly. If people remember the Covington situation with the kids from Kentucky, that part of that started when a group of Black Hebrew Israelites ended up in a verbal dispute with the kids from Covington. So it's those two things sort of working together. In some respects, even if it's not line for line, some of the teaching, I think, mirrors other black spiritual practices, whether it's Nation of Islam, basically that, or the 5 percenters, the Nation of Gods and Earths, that there is a certain divinity within black people and within the black man, and there's a certain inherent evilness within white people and within the white man. That's the sort of the very basic gist of what we're talking about. I'm not sure, again, if that's what Kanye's drawing on, but that's my basic understanding of it.
Kanye, at later points in this interview, makes it crystal clear he's a Christian, and he basically argues, we're all in this together. So I think that part of it, he's probably not on board with, but I do think he's arguing, no, I'm a Jew. And because he says that repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that claim, am I reading Lex's body language or other people's reaction over social media, is the claim, a black person saying that they're a Jew, is that offensive to Jewish people?
It seems to be. I had a conversation with a Jewish person earlier this week, and we talked about that, and they were offended by that. And I actually asked them about these particular definitions. Semite in the dictionary is a member of a group of Semitic-speaking people of the Near East and Northern Africa, including the Arabs, Ethiopians, and Hebrews and Phoenicians. So I can understand why Kanye and many of them would actually say then that black people would be considered Semites, a big group of us. And I don't know why it's offensive if this is what the dictionary is saying a Semite is.
So my takeaway, again, rudimentary understanding, but, and I don't know if Kanye did this, but a lot of the movement, they'll say, they're not the real Jews. So it's not just saying that, hey, there's a lost tribe, black people are Jews too. They're saying, you guys are imposters. And that's where it becomes anti-Semitic.
And that's where I could see them being offended and saying, like, Kanye, even if you're not saying it that way, people are interpreting it. Other people are using that argument to say we're not really Jews.
And he may have actually said it on Tucker. If I'm remembering right, he said, I think black people are the real Jews. So he,
I feel like I feel like I remember him say something to that effect. But let me say this: Kanye is again pulling on a thread that I think if you pull on it hard enough will really expose a lot of theological confusion. Because, and I was talking to TJ and Shamik about this, there is a sense in which, particularly in America, you will hear black Christians talk about the Exodus story and place ourselves in the place of the children of Israel who had to escape slavery in Egypt, right? That's how you get Harriet Tubman sort of referred to as the Moses of her generation. Mm-hmm. But then the same people, when Earth, Wind, and Fire come on, they said, no, we African, we Egyptians, we're kings, and they want to draw on the sort of historical dynasties of ancient African kingdoms from all across Africa. And there is a confusion there, because when we do that, we don't engage in Egyptology or, talk about Pharaoh and say, oh, well, we can't really do that because, the Egyptians held slaves. We embrace all of it because of his regal nature. So there's a matter of flip-flopping. The other thing is, to Shamika's point, are there African Jews? Absolutely. Absolutely. But to my understanding, and unless somebody's willing to make this argument, the Africans who were sold into slavery and brought to this country, to my understanding, were not practicing Jews. Now, if somebody wants to say there is an entire group up and down the western coast of Africa, in Benin, and Nigeria, and Ghana, the Ivory Coast, who were Jews, and those are the people who were brought to America, and this is the religion that they practice in the South and other parts of the country, and this is the religion that now Kanye West practices, they would have a very hard time making that argument, because Kanye West is on one hand saying he's the true Jew, but then also saying that he's a Christian. So there's a lot of theological confusion in this debate, generally speaking.
Well, his position, though, is that black people, having been heavily persecuted, are God's chosen people, and that's why he's calling them imposters.
Wait,
right?
is that what you think he's saying when he says black people are the real Jews?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this is, and again, don't know.
Okay.
Kanye is not very articulate in these interviews. He's all over the place. But I think the reason he's claiming this is because, look, we've been told all throughout the Bible, you're going to be persecuted. Christians, Jews obviously have been. And so he's talking to particularly the Ben Shapiro's of the world, the guys that are heavily religious. He's calling them imposters, and that the Holocaust, that was something different, that black people are the real Jews. We're God's chosen people, you're not.
Interesting. So I didn't, because I'm a literalist, right? I thought he was making a theological claim. It sounds like you're saying you think he's making a claim that Jewish equals oppression, black people have been oppressed for centuries, ergo black people are the real Jews.
Sounds like it to me.
Okay.
I'm listening to it again, second, third time here. Listened to it this morning. I can't disagree with Kanye's argument that this whole abortion thing that we seem all wrapped up in, and its impact on American black people. I'll just keep it over here in America, where I live and am concerned. I'm not offended or upset that he's calling that a Holocaust. It's an analogy. It may be inaccurate, but I don't think it's offensive that Planned Parenthood and all the people that support abortion and its disparate impact, Ibram Kendi X, and any outcome that's not statistically supported or whatever is some sort of example of racism. And so the slaughter of black babies in the womb, I gotta agree with Kanye here and his analogy, and I know it's provocative, but I just don't, that shouldn't be offensive to Jewish people. And I don't think he's wrong, because what I hear him saying is like, these black artists the black artists that are making this death music and devaluing black life is at the heart of why abortion seems so central to us. And then he's saying that these black artists that are making this music, they're being supported and paid for, and the people profiting from it are Jewish people in the music industry. Black artists are profiting from it as well. But I don't understand why he can't call out those two groups without people being offended.
I doubt that religious Jews are offended by this because typically, again, Ben Shapiro is maybe the most famous practicing Jew in America. He's so anti-abortion. 20 million black babies have been aborted since 1973, and 6 million Jews. And I get it that, you know, he talked about the number difference and all that, but if you're concerned about human life, a conservative practicing Jew, I doubt they're offended by this. It's probably the secular Jews that would come in and say, don't compare anything to the Holocaust. Everything's dangerous when you talk about Jews.
TJ, I think just the way the conversations tend to go, any reference to Jewish people in any way that seems like a criticism, and in fact, it doesn't even have to be a criticism. The notion that, you know, Jewish people have an outsized influence on media and culture, which is what the writer in the LA Times article said is a trope or a part of a narrative, that in and of itself is seen and described as anti-Semitic, right? So I agree with you in terms of Ben Shapiro, someone like Ben Shapiro saying, yes, I'm completely against abortion. I would assume, my guess would be his argument would say, well, stop saying that the Jews are behind it. And I don't even know that that's what Kanye was trying to say.
Yeah, that wasn't my takeaway at all.
Yeah, but...
And there is a big distinction to be made that abortion is not targeting one single group.
Correct.
There's tons of white babies, tons of Jewish babies that are also... And so that would be the distinction they make.
Correct. And I think it's helpful in general because, again, we go from talking, like Kanye is going from talking about individuals to groups, and we do that a lot in our sort of our public commentary, to have a leveling place that says that there's no vice, no virtue that's inherent to any particular group, right? And I say that as a Christian first. So I know my Bible well enough to know that when Paul, the Apostle Paul is in Romans and listing out all of these sins, greed and malice and murder, he's talking about everybody.
Yep. That
is the one leveling place that everybody can be assured that no group gets to buy their way out of sin. So when you get into using these terms in terms of group level discussions, I make a distinction between a description and an explanation. And people do this all the time. I mean, if I watch Fox News or any conservative network, they don't have any problem running a string of videos with criminal suspects who happen to be black in large cities engaging in violent crime. And sometimes they'll say, 6% of the population accounts for 50% of all homicides.
Right.
And I got to eat that. Because the first question I ask myself is it true?
Right.
And I know the data well enough to know that it is true. But if a black commentator goes on there and says, well, 70% of the media companies in Hollywood are run by Jewish people, then all of a sudden that's off limits. So again, if we're using group level characteristics as a description to say these are the people who do X, who run X, who finance X, that's one thing. But if we're using it as an explanation, these people do these things because of X, right? Because they are black, because they are Jewish, because they are white, then I think you get yourself in different, more dangerous territory.
Right. And I think the way we watched him cut him off and say, no, these are humans, like he wanted to not allow Kanye to say that these are the Jewish people that are doing this to him in the industry. But like you said, Delano, when it's the other way around, when you want to point out something that black people do, we have no problem with numbers. We have no problem characterizing it or grouping it, but he cut him off mid-sentence to then say, no, this is a human. Well, we don't do that in any other thing. We can look across media and see when we specify a black or a white. And I get when Kanye is saying, he's pretty much stating a fact. He doesn't really want the argument, I guess, on whether or not black people are Jews. He wants to bring it to 2022 and say, okay, like, I'm a Jew, But let's talk about what's happening right now. Opposed to spending a lot of time arguing about whether or not black people are Jews or black people are not, let's talk about this Holocaust, as he calls it, happening right now in 2022. And I think a lot of people are missing that.
I've not seen him, to your point, Delano, say they're doing this because they're Jewish. In fact, he later on says, we may get to it here, he's like, but they are Jews. They're people who happen to be Jews.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And there's a large group of them.
Yeah.
And so there's a big difference. And again, particularly the people on the right. If you would go on, there was a famous interview that Bill Maher had Sam Harris on. And they were talking about radical Islamic terrorists, right? And Ben Affleck lost his mind because he's like, you're going to attack the kid down the street, the Islamic kid who's got nothing to do with it. He's like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who are dropping bombs,
right,
saying Allah Akbar, right? And then it blows up. That's
right.
And we've got to be able to have this discussion. This, to me, is what Kanye's trying to do. And there's a lot of people that would acknowledge that, hey, you got to have this conversation. Radical Islamic terrorists, a tiny percentage of them are wreaking havoc in the Western world. We got to have this conversation. Mm-hmm. This, to me, is what Kanye's trying to do, albeit kind of clunky. And this is he's the Donald Trump.
I'm not sure if this interview did not feel clunky to me, and I actually think Kanye was on point. Particularly, again, he ain't Rush Limbaugh. He's not some super skilled broadcaster or whatever. But he seemed comfortable. He seemed to like this person, and seemed to have command of the facts and information he wanted to unpack during this interview. It's I wish he were me. I'm watching this and I'm sitting there going, Kanye, because what Kanye's talking about is my point 1,000% that needs to be discussed, and he's forcing this conversation like, hey man, there's this secular Jewish element and black celebrities that have an unhealthy relationship that seems to come together to make money promoting a culture of death around black people. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about it.
Right.
Because if we can sit around and say Donald Trump and his rhetoric leads to X, Y, and Z, why can't we say, hey, this rhetoric around this particular style of music leads to X, Y, and Z? We all, no. That's a make-believe world. All the rappers with their long criminal rap sheets, they're not really trying to be criminals. I know they got criminal records, and I know they brag about crime and all the crimes they did, but that's make-believe. They're just Robert De Niro in Goodfellas. Right. They're just, cut it, because Robert De Niro doesn't play Robert De Niro in Goodfellas. Right. Marlon Brando didn't play Marlon Brando in The Godfather. He played Don Corleone. So I was very impressed so far with Kanye, and all that I've watched. I thought he did a good job. And I can feel the hatred rising every time this music comes out. And again, I used to listen to it, but I know I can feel the hatred rising. And for Kanye to say, hey man, I want you to take some accountability. I want these black artists to take some accountability, but I also want the executives, the Jewish executives, just happen to take some accountability for this hatred. And I want to add this one little final point, because this is where Kanye is really going, or certainly where I'm going. I've lived long enough to see the puppet masters in the media and whoever the puppet masters are in the world, and they're not just Jewish people. It's everybody. I've seen them go. Jason Whitlock used to be very comfortable with the FAG word. And I've seen them make that reprehensible and despicable and uncool. And so you know what Jason Whitlock doesn't do? He don't use the FAG word anymore. I've seen it run out of sports. That used to be like one of the favorite words in sports. It's been run out. They say, you know what? No, we're not doing that anymore. It's uncool. It's unhealthy. We're not going to elevate the hatred around this group of people, gay people. They're protected. And so we're running this word and that kind of abuse out. But when it comes to somebody, Kanye, anybody saying, hey, this music y'all making and making billions of dollars off of, it's elevating hatred around black men, making our communities unsafe. Oh, that ain't our problem, or that's all make-believe. That music don't do that. Kanye's on solid ground here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shanika.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, everybody that acts like they don't understand what this man is saying, they are full of shit. Because it's clear. He has said more than one time that he doesn't mean all Jews. Even going back to the Drink Champs interview, he broke down exactly what he was saying, why he was saying it. When he said, this is the real anti-Semitism. I'ma your bitch. I'ma kill this nigga. I'ma your bitch. I'ma kill this nigga. He said, how many of y'all would bet your house that these type of lyrics aren't in the first 3 top songs on Apple Music? Like, he has been so clear as to what he is saying. And when they took that interview down, I knew for sure they're getting ready to railroad this man, because what I keep saying is he's talking over a lot of people's heads. That's why people are like, oh, he's crazy, or, you know, it's just that you're not listening to him and you don't want to hear what this man is saying because you are full of it. Like, I should have wore boots today because this is ridiculous. Like,